Welcome to Notes to My Legal Self. Together, we explore topics of interest to in-house lawyers. We cover career, practice tips, leadership, the future of law, mental health, legal tech, and much, much more. Know someone who'd make a great guest? Let us know. Self-nominations are encouraged. They're an act of courage. Want to get the most from this conversation? Ask questions, comment, like, follow, say hello. In short, engage. Finally, have fun. In-house legal practice is a serious business, but you don't have to take yourself seriously. Let's begin. Here's your host, Olga Mack.
Oh, hello, everyone. It is so good to be with you. I am not traveling for a few weeks. This means we can gonna be doing shows and have important conversations. As you know, I try not to do them on the road because let's just say I have little faith in internet when I travel. It is sometimes spotty and folks have bad experience, and sometimes my speakers have bad experience, and I really want to make sure that you're part of the conversation and get out as much as possible. So here we are. Today, we're going to have an important conversation about data and information and structuring your legal department to make sure you take advantage of all of that. So very exciting conversation. I have a very experienced and thoughtful guest. I've had a few conversations with him about data and information, and every time I talk to him, I come out enlightened. So reminder, be part of the conversation, ask questions, and without further ado, Bo, welcome to Notes to My Legal Self. I'm really excited about it. Please introduce yourself.
Yeah, thank you so much, Olga, for this opportunity. I'm really excited to have this enjoyed our previous ones about this and other things too. So yeah, I'm Bo Kinloch. I am the former director of legal operations at Hasbro Inc. I've been at Hasbro for almost 13 years, developing a legal career that's for me started really right out of law school because I went to law school late in my career. I'd had a previous career as a PlayStation game designer before that. And while at Hasbro, I think, I really entered legal ops sort of early on, didn't know it was called that at the time. And, I give a lot of, props and thanks to one of my mentors, Deb Euler, who helped to kind of, shepherd this journey along for me and help me find a place that was both as a practicing attorney and as someone who wanted to really build a platform for our legal department in our company.
Oh, I love it. We have some enthusiastic folks who are happy to see you. Hello, Justin. He's very clearly excited to see you, so I'm gonna give him 3 shout-outs. Thank you for saying hello, and thank you for being your cheerful self. As you know, that's the way I like you. And for all of you who are part of the conversation, definitely say hello, ask questions, and make yourself known. It's more fun when you do that. And Bo, thank you for sharing about your exciting late in life adventures in law. It's never too early or too late to law. And I'm going to use it as a verb very intentionally because it is such an important part of what we do in a society to do things lawfully and have a structure. Thank you for sharing that you had previous life, including as a game designer. I'm just going to ask you at some point and be ready for this because this is a fun fact I didn't know about you, how that influenced your interactions with lawyers. And I guess maybe that will give us an opportunity for me to ask you a question about, before you came to Hasbro and, did what you did, what you just shared, what else have you done in life and what was the scenic route?
Oh, I've had a very scenic route, as you would have it, Olga. So yes, I've been in a lot of very creative industries. I was a musician, played in bands. My undergraduate was full of excitement with. I was a literature major, and focused very much on like literary theory. So all of these things kind of keep knocking around, and I think influencing me, or I think that's the benefit of having sort of a broad experience base in life too.
Yeah. Um, I would encourage somebody else to say hello, Bernard, and he is clearly noticing the guitars in the back. I love that you show up with so many instruments. Clearly, they're part of who you are. So thank you for sharing that. Let's start talking about information and data because I know you had some rich adventures, and I want to make sure that you share your insights and kind of help folks to understand what to come. So let's take a step back and without being too technical, definitely we're not going to be coding here. Let's talk about if you were sort of think about or designing legal department and all the legal data and information, how would you sort of start? How do you think about that environment? You are the architect of it. How do you do it justice?
Yeah, great question, and it's nice to even be able to frame it as a question like that at this point. I don't think that was an option. When I started doing this, it was just kind of, this is what we've got, and let's try to make it work as best as possible. But I think what I'd like to say about it would be something to the effect of that we do to think about like you can almost think of your legal department as a kind of symphony, or an orchestra that has different parts you can conduct, right? There are different practice groups that do very different things. They're all within legal. And what you start to notice over time is that these things, either you want them to be more connected to each other and they're not, or you can see that there are connections that you could exploit further. Sort of help answer that question.
Yeah, I love the analogy of, and by the way, I am musically challenged. I have many talents. Music is absolutely not one of them. I appreciate music, but no one ever wants to hear me sing. I made a mistake once in the group context. I've actually started singing, and let's just say that was too much disclosure. I really appreciate it. I love the way you talk about it as symphony and orchestra, and I'm gonna just stop at that analogy because that's a limit of my knowledge. But I like for you to actually sort of when you talk about, how you want to connect various things and how you think about it. Tell me more, especially in the context of, you may or may not have a sort of overarching platform in your department, and then you have numerous point solutions, and then this is I'm gonna say something beyond my depth, which is how do you make sure that your violin is in tune with the rest of the instruments?
Yeah, yeah, that's a great question, and analogy too. Maybe we'll circle back to that a little bit. So yeah, so I think that, like, in house we produce legal work product. Attorneys produce it, paralegals produce it. It's part of our bread and butter. And if you have point solutions, I mean, the point solutions like a contract man specialized in doing that very well, or e-billing matter management, or some things like management, etc. These all help with that creation of that work product in that organization, right? Maybe you don't have those though, and you're still, working in shared drives or some kind of SharePoint hybrid or something like that, I think this framework can still help conceptualize, like, how does information flow around your department? Where does it need to be kept? And what is sort of the ways of starting to tease out like how those connections could work more technically from, the moment that you kind of realize it more intuitively that, hey, it would be great to know that our IP registrations kind of match up with some of our contracts and the rights that we may or may not be giving, for instance, right? So maybe I'll pause there.
Yeah, yeah. And by the way, your orchestra analogy resonated with a few more folks, not just me. I love Deborah picked it up. I actually do think it very much captures um, what happens on the ground, and I think what you're trying to say. And interestingly, do you feel that when you connect those point solutions, do you feel that the gaps within the sort of architecture of information architecture, data architecture of your department, maybe even company, depending how the legal is set up, do you think it sort of could amplify the flaws and give you an opportunity to do better? Or like, how do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's an insightful question and comment there because, yeah, the way things are organized will tend to, amplify or attenuate, the, let's just stay with the analogy, like the signal flows that you have, right? So to the extent that, something is set up initially with a certain set of assumptions, right? Because that's usually what it boils down to is that, at the beginning you think it's going to be one way, so you set it up that way. That later could turn out that, that was not necessarily the thing that you believe will help you more. And you might have to do some work around improving that. I mean, I think I believe in, and it's probably not a very contentious point, that this doesn't stop. It's like we're always kind of iterating through how to make things connect better, no matter what stage you're at, I think. But to come back to the work product idea and the creation of that, I think some of this comes down to, like, is it repeatable? It's something you've done, even if you have a great point solution. Maybe you needed to bring in expertise that you didn't, use before for a particular thing. Is that something that's now readily doable again with the tools you've got? And if not, like, how could you make that part of your more standard process or more standard workflow? So I'll pause
And
there.
yeah, and for folks who may be new to this, or sort of the word repeatable is actually very key here. And you clearly think it's important. Maybe can you articulate why?
Yeah, that's like, if we're studying for like so many things, either from an intake and risk point of view, I think repeatable helps when you can say, hey, these are the elements that need to be here and need to be therefore repeated every time you do this. Or from the efficiency standpoint, that you've come up with like something that worked really well for, say, contract flow. Is that something that you can do the next time so that you get the benefit of whatever it was that you came up with, without necessarily the overhead of thinking and iterating through a solution every time?
Yeah. So you alluded to the relationship between tasks, work product, and data information. Um, what is that relationship, and maybe how to optimize that relationship to make it more repeatable, so you can learn from your mistakes, build on your successes, and do better next time.
Yeah, and this is the sort of like the hard part, right? Is the how. Like, you may have some intuitive ideas, you may have sort of a best practices that would suggest, but how do you do that? Like, I think the way to is like, let's just take contracts for example. So in my view, we should probably all be thinking about contracts more as projects than as like discrete, just legal only activity. They involve stakeholders. They involve a beginning, middle, and an end, like project would. As I mentioned, the stakeholders. So there's a lot of back and forth that happens over time as that contract is negotiated and developed, et cetera. And this is particularly true of your more complex, not the one where you're just doing, say, a more rote non-disclosure agreement. But how do you sort of capture all of that stuff that may or may not be in your point solution, may not be in your contract life cycle management, that nevertheless contributed to what made that a good contract, what made that something you would like to try to repeat later. So yeah, like conversations with other people, like a gut check you might have had with a colleague. How is that going there? How do those notes fit in there? Maybe it's just like where you started drafting from in the first place. Like maybe it was a template, but maybe it was, a previous agreement you'd already done that got you further than just the template would.
Mhm.
So I'll pause there.
Yeah, interesting. So I like the conception of contracts, especially when they're a little bit more sophisticated and complex than NDAs as a project. Although you can think of the NDA as the beginning of a project, really.
Yeah, absolutely.
So let's embrace NDAs. Let's just say we love them. They're part of it. We may not need to negotiate every single one of them, but they are a celebration in the beginning of pretty much every major transaction. So, but it's interesting when you talk about contracting as a project, and therefore that has implications on the way you manage it and the work product and data. And I'm curious, in your model of thinking through it as a project, how does it, as opposed to series of actions, for example, or other ways, how does, if you conceptualize it this way, how does that change the way you structure your legal department?
So maybe starting with the smaller, which would be like, how do you structure the like project? How do you project manage a contract instead of just draft it? Would be like, it's to start to think about the kinds of, all right, and this is getting into the how too of what we were talking about before. So you've got all these different stakeholders, you have different documents. Like, let's talk about that a little bit, like categorically here, because I think what we've got are different kinds of in-house legal data, and maybe just a footnote here that there's there's some very interesting discussions about what is and what is not legal data, like sort of broadly, but here I'm talking about like in-house. So we've got things like content, we've got the actual document, we've got the contract, its terms, what it says. We've got the correspondence, the emails. Let's consider those documents for now that are part of that file. If you remember, like, I still like to refer to the old sort of Redwell way of doing this, where you had an agreement that was like the most recent draft on one side and all the correspondence on the other side of the folder. Those are still applicable things. So is the metadata about, like, how would you, if you're in a library and you need to look up a card catalog, like how would you find the kind of contract you're looking for specifically? Like, what is the data about the content? Then you've got, a kind of data around what I call telemetry. And like, since I come from an app development background where data collection is part of that, this gets, often overlooked, but these are your timestamps. This is when, such and such, person sent an email on a certain day and time, or a system event, like the contract was, updated in status from draft to something else. And then you've got your financial data that is in that contract. That might be what's in the four corners of it. It might also include information about cost of what it took to draft it. And then there's, I think, a final bucket which deserves its own kind of treatment, which is about like contextual data, which is, you know, what are your metrics going to be? How do you develop those KPIs? So that's a lot.
That is a lot, and
uh,
I'm processing it. You mentioned I've been taking notes. A few pieces of data, content, document, correspondence, metadata, what I would classify things as usage data, financial data. Those are at this point probably outside of legal department. So that's a lot of data, and we're just getting started.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not so sure that the financial data necessarily is outside of legal data. I mean, I think our contracts are very rich because there'll be some kind of costing on it. Maybe there's going to be revenue on it. Maybe there's going to be some kind of royalties. Yeah, is it accurate to the way a royalty accountant would do it? No, probably not. But at least it's a place to start, right?
I mean, and to be clear, contracts are only interesting when there is financial data in them. Otherwise, why even bother, right? They are valuable, increasingly digital assets. So if they're not connected to dollar signs or whatever your currency, that sort of takes, the sex appeal out of the conversation. So money is an important part of it. I guess what I'm suggesting is that this is the point where there's a massive overlap with finance.
Yeah,
without talking ownership
100%.
or anything like that. This is where it becomes the core of the business. This becomes P&L.
100%. Yes. And you also asked a very interesting question that led into this too, which was like, how does this suggest your department kind of is structured? And I would say one of the elements here is, and I'll get a little bit more specific because I think it's useful, but since a lot of companies use like the Microsoft stack of Office 365, in the background, it will run something called the graph. And the graph is a way of associating people with documents and other events, so that's a hugely important factor about how you're arranging your legal data in your department, is understanding like what those relationships are, how people will do and contribute to each part of the let's call it the whole like ecosystem. Because I think what we're trying to do here ultimately is get a kind of like really kind of radical like recycling, where all of these scraps of data can actually do and help and build up a bigger picture about where resources are needed and where risk is and things like that.
I love the term radical recycling. If we're gonna be radical about anything, it should be about recycling, both in this the way you meant it and in general way. Let's be radical about it. That's a great way to put it. Let's for folks who may be new to this or maybe not as technical. When you talk about graph, what is it? Let's define it, and then your conversation around relationships, what that means. That has a very technical meaning. Would love to sort of let's drill down a little bit more and then kind of explain how that association, in the scraps of data will give you a full picture so you can be a better operator of risk and value related to, say, legal and maybe your enterprise.
Yeah. So Graph is just the name that Microsoft gave to one of their set of background processes and connectors that connect people who are logged into the Exchange server to things that they're creating, like in your Azure bucket. All right, so I got really technical, but if you've used a Microsoft kind of enterprise solution before, you might see stuff like, here's documents your colleagues are working on, and here's the last like 5 things you worked on. And you're like, how did it know that? It knows that because it's just making an association between you as the author of this document or your colleague as the author of a document and the document itself. Is that helpful?
Yeah, no, I think it's very helpful, and I do want to make sure it's a very important conversation. We're not going too in depth, but I want to make sure that everybody comes along for the journey and part of the conversation. So let's shift gears just a little bit and talk about contextual data, which I think you kind of alluding toward.
Yeah.
How do we go that way, and then why? And what is the relationship between context and other types of data, and what is the sort of enlightened legal operations, or even in-house lawyers practices could be to make sure that contextual data is sort of part of our calculus.
Yeah, so I think that there's so much, a lot of things that have happened here, a lot of like best practices there, but also it's an exciting area because a lot to explore in this area of, okay, so you've got the different buckets that I, um, identified before. So your content, your metadata, your telemetry, your financial. Um, the contextual is when you start to ask questions that are about your data story, that are about, okay, so what is important to us either as a department or as a practice group or as a business? What do we value? Do we value, a certain kind of, revenue uplift on the business side? What are the agreements that do that? Well, then you have to start sort of finding a way to tag or identify those in your data system. And so that is that sort of, it's this extra layer that you get either through adding additional tags to things that are more meaningful to uh, maybe your institution specifically, or they're kind of calculated the unstructured data. So it might be things like, a count of, numbers of contracts, numbers of this type, numbers of that type, or a frequency. How often does something happen within a certain period of time? And starting to develop those into key performance indicators, which would be, okay, last month we got, let's just say, 25 contracts done. Can we get 27 next month? Like, what other levers could we pull to, if that was important to us, to make that happen?
Wow. Yeah. No, that's a good way to do it. Are there any other best practices to get that contextual data, or yeah, I guess let's just limit it at best practices, right? Because what I'm trying to hit is that people are in different stages of their journey,
Yeah.
and I'm wondering if there is sort of a way to get at it at various stages, because that stuff is pretty advanced. It gets very advanced very quickly.
Yeah. So let's maybe just backing up and saying that what if our goal is to reduce, say, the time it takes from a request coming in from the business for an agreement and the executed version coming. Well, how would you do that? You would need to know what time it came in. You need to know the timestamp from when it was finally executed, and you would just subtract those, find the difference. That's your amount of time, and you want to keep doing that for everything that goes through the system, right? And that builds up a picture of, okay, now on average we could take either all of it came and say what was that amount of time, or we could look at it, let's say in the month of November, how many, um, the average time for any contract that came through the system in November. Something interesting like, okay, well, what was it for November last year as a comparison? So is that starting to sort of chip away at that?
Yeah, I like that. And by the way, we have a question which I'm gonna flash here because I think it's a good question. Sort of the mindset of moving from it depends to the data shows, It's a massive shift, and unfortunately can't tell the LinkedIn user who asked this question because this person is not connected to me. Um, but the enlightened LinkedIn user, asked for tips to shift that conversation, because I think if you shift that conversation as a legal leader, things that's actually a first tweak to make on your path to up leveling your conversation and including data. What do you think? And maybe what are the ways to do that shift?
Yeah, very good question, and to me, honest on it, because I think that's at the heart of it. And maybe what we sort of skipped over is that, yeah, these are ways of looking at actual data, actual information that will tell a story about your operations as a department at whatever sort of level it's set at. So the advantage here is that you're now telling a story about, this contract, has this kind of expectation that used to be a guess based on everyone's sort of feel, and now is now well, no, we actually have this information, and across a year, across whatever amount of time, this is how long things spent. And you can then take that another step and say, well, let's say that it's the business that says, oh, things have been illegal a long time. If you now include a step in the middle of your contract process that says, okay, well, when was the draft turned over to the client for their review, and how long did it sit, with them out of that whole period? That tells a story too. That's not just about like legal is taking a long time, right?
Yeah, yeah. So I know of this wonderful organization that I'm sure you heard of called Sally. They're doing some interesting work and mapping the kind of stuff that is illegal, not just contracts, and yes, contracts too, which is the reason we first got along. Um, that plays into the sort of standardization movement, which historically either failed from the beginning or had some marketing lift and then kind of tapered off. So we're yet to really see like a full-blown standardization in law, though everyone understands, the benefits of interoperability. And if you don't, all you have to imagine is showing up, to a foreign country with a different outlet and not being able to use your computer, and that's the problems with interoperability in action now amplified across legal systems. Now you have a real problem. So, what are your thoughts about activities like Sally, standardization, and kind of would that be helpful? What can we do to help that effort, or maybe some other one?
Yeah. I'd like to start by thanking you, Olga, because it was through your show that I, first learned about Sally, and I thought I was so excited. Like, I was like, oh wow, this could really be something we could all really use. So when I look at this, and many different ways and to use it, and this is by no means like the only way or the best way or anything, but what I got excited about is when I talked about that metadata layer was being able to say, let's compare apples to apples. So maybe we do have, for instance, in our own department, we have a matter management system, and we've had a hard time maybe getting law firms to agree on, how to classify one matter that looks really similar to us, but not, it's called something else, by another law firm. Or let's even say with our contract management system that, maybe that law firm work was around a contract, and are we calling it the same thing? So the standardization comes in and says, well, yeah, we actually have just like a nice list of tags that we can agree make sense. And so that we don't have slightly different variations for the same thing. Cropping one, major help, I think, here.
Yeah.
Well,
So
well,
they're
pause there.
clearly,
Yeah.
yeah, there are clearly some fans of Sally in the house. Thank you, Sarah, for the shout out. The episode, Bo, you referred to is where I had a conversation with Damien and Jim, and the two of them are very um, articulate and have a definite vision, and I can definitely rally up behind that. So since then, I was at Legal Week, and I don't know if you got a wind of that, but now they have AI that automatically assigns tags,
Yeah.
which I don't know about you, but that was just candy to me. I really enjoyed seeing
Yeah.
that, and so really exciting stuff. Um, we are coming to the end. We have a few more questions. I can talk data to you all day. Legal data is definitely something. Let's just say my jam without me being too musical. Let's talk about what we can extrapolate from the lessons of Power BI and create a data warehouse and just kind of that whole stuff, which is not a small thing either, but let's just touch on
It,
it.
it's not a small thing either. And, it would be great maybe to, at some point, maybe I could do a follow-up or something, put some visuals on what some of these things are. But so most, for most departments, most companies, you'll have access to some kind of visual or business intelligence tool. Either it's going to be Microsoft's Power BI, or it's going to be Tableau, or something similar. And I think we're sort of bringing this up because it's a way to see how all this, what we've just been talking about, works in kind of like a nice microcosm. So if you're sort of interested in this and want to take another step into, okay, well, what would something like this actually look like? I think is a really interesting place to start. So a lot of information online about how to do it, but usually you'll have access to one or the other tools in your department, or you can probably get access to it. The first thing, and these things are so compelling. Like, so there's so many, like, there's a beautiful art form to doing great data visualizations and telling those data stories that we're talking about through dashboards, charts, graphs, all that. But it starts through a very like sort of clunky place, which is before you do any of that, you first got to figure out what your sources of data are. And the tool is that you can start to see how you could bring in different things that weren't necessarily designed to go together, but can be made to go together into one report. So you could take, for instance, some Excel sheets that you've got that you want to see how they kind of interrelate. Information you have in your SharePoint system, or maybe you have information in a point solution that is extractable by Power BI. And really, your first few days and experience with it, just really building those kind of connections that we talked about, sort of in the abstract sense of, like, yeah, we're building relationships between our different systems and our different functions. You can actually visualize this in Power BI. Take your, like, you might take a contracts table, you might take a people table, and you create what they're called relationships between those two things, so that then you say, okay, who are all the people who worked on this project, or who, what were all of the contracts that I worked on or somebody else worked on. You can start to slice and dice things just because you've set them up in this sort of rational way that the tool affords, and you get to kind of see it happen in your dashboard, from this time and investment you spent in connecting things together. And that, I think is a great sort of next level foray into everything we've just been talking about.
Yeah, yeah. By the way, happy to have you back. We can pursue any and all of this in depth. I think that will make my day. Absolutely. This is a very, I can tell you that this is a very interesting conversation to many. We have a pretty busy chat. Remember, many lawyers like to observe as opposed to participate in this type of conversation. This is fairly unusual. So I love all the enthusiasm about data among lawyers and legal professionals, many of whom are not just lawyers. There's definitely enthusiasm around Sally, and I agree with Sarah that large language models and Sally are a fresh breath of air into future of law. And we do have another question. Um, about BI software, whether you have sort of if there are any issues specific to using legal data in BI software. So I'll let you handle that one because that's a good question. Um,
Yeah, Jason, thank you, and thanks everyone for hopping in too. It makes it really fun and exciting, as Lucas says. I think there are some challenges to legal data specifically, which is it does not immediately lend itself to the kind of like quantitative things that a business intelligence application wants to do. Unless you're talking about like what we were talking about, the financial data specifically, dollars and numbers, and that's easy. So I think the trick is often create a proxy, either through a count or a time or a time difference or something like that, into something that can be quantified. And again, I think like just doing a little bit of this would be helpful to see kind of a little bit more about what I mean. But it's taking like, how many, like, let's say you have, 1,000 contracts in your CLM, and I'm sure it's a lot more, but it's just a nice even number. How many of those, fall into the different categories of types of contracts that you've been tracking? What's the volume of one compared to the other? That's something you can do really easily by counting, right, the number of this kind of contract that got this kind of tag.
Yeah, so we're having a robust discussion in the chat as well. Sarah is chiming in around limitations of the tools. As much as I would love to pursue this with much greater depth, maybe, Bo, we can leave it for another conversation because this is not a 2-minute conversation.
No.
Even I know that. So, but let me maybe ask you, a final question about how do we now sort of get to the contextual data about risks and value, right? Because in the end of the day, I, as a former general counsel, need to have conversations with my CEO and the board about what's in it for them. And what's in it for them usually boils down what is the risk, but really more importantly, what is the value? Because business professionals are much more excited the value conversation than risk conversation. So I think of the value as sort of the cheese that covers the broccoli, which is the risk conversation. This is what 15 years of practice and being at the table gets you. The broccoli conversation, the same conversation I have with my children. So
That's great.
so how do you get there to that risk and value?
Well, this lets me bring up my other, like, one of my other favorite tools and techniques, which is design thinking, because I think this is a conversation that you have with all of those stakeholders. You have it with your senior management team in the business. Like, you need to have the drive and find value, and you need to get on the same page on that, because if you're not, you have the risk of like whoever the big suit or executive in the room is, well, they're what they value will drive that conversation. So I think it's a sort of fun but semi-formal way of having, like, getting down to brass tacks, like, okay, what's strategic here, and then what are the things that are definite needs for lights on, to have. On the risk side, it's, what are all those things that may cause a data privacy risk if they are not addressed. And then for every risk you introduce, you can also introduce mitigating steps and kind of knock it back down. I'm of the belief that we can quantify this stuff, that we can kind of through, I'm going to call fuzzy math. That's probably not the right term, but, by giving kind of gradations of risk or points, or, that strategic initiative gets high value because all agreed that it does, those things can then drive what is valuable, what is risky. And I think the key thing then is a feedback loop where you play that back, like, okay, how did that work out? Was there litigation against X, Y, or Z? Was the anticipated lift that the business person said this agreement was going to give us, did that manifest itself? Did it come up? And did we see it in our ERP systems or, our SAP or other enterprise tool? So it's a much bigger conversation, but yeah, I think there are ways of doing it.
Yeah, well, let's go from fuzzy math to more precise math. I mean, that's kind of the beauty about math. It has a little bit more precision. So let's keep it beautiful that way. We are at the end of the show, unfortunately, but yeah, let's have it again. Bo, I would like, for you to give you an opportunity to say goodbye. I want to thank you for being here. Clearly, a lot of engagement and enthusiasm on this thing called data, legal data, and information, and how to architect that future. Certainly something that excites me when I get up in the morning. But I would love for you to say goodbye and maybe give one takeaway. We covered a lot of territory in this world of legal data. And it was somewhat more advanced conversation than I tend to have on the show. But I would like for you to give one takeaway that, folks maybe kind of hold on to implement right away, or maybe work towards as a part of your goodbye.
Yeah. Oh, thank you so much. I mean, thank you, Olga. This was like so much fun. I don't know how I got so interested in data, but I find it endlessly fascinating too. So love to do it again. And this is just really wonderful. I would say, ultimately this two things. This is a way we can break down those silos in our department, and a way of collaborating and working in a more holistic way and doing some of that, radical recycling that I mentioned. So I'll leave you with that.
Oh, I love it. What a great place to live. Thank you, Bo. Thank you, audience, for being so enthusiastic and sharing our passion for doing law better. There's opportunity for all of us to show up in a much better way. So if you have suggestions for other speakers who can have this in-depth conversation for the benefit of community, especially in-house community, definitely let me know. And with that in mind, I'll see you next time.
Thank you for stopping by. We hope you enjoyed this episode of Notes to My Legal Self. Know someone who'd make a great guest? Let us know. Self-nominations are encouraged. They are an act of courage. Remember, the future of law is bright. Enjoy your in-house practice. It's an adventure of a lifetime. See you soon.